Welcome back. Welcome to this new section on App Engine. App Engine is one of the most important managed services provided by Google Cloud Platform. Actually, App Engine is one of the earliest managed services in the cloud. App Engine was first released by Google Cloud Platform as far back as 2008. Yes, I'm talking about 2008, which was when the financial crisis started. So it's almost a decade and a half back that the first version of App Engine came about. So let's get started with App Engine in this section. App Engine is the simplest way to deploy and scale your applications in GCP. It provides end-to-end application management. It provides you with a lot of features. It supports Go, Java, .NET, Node.js, PHP, Ruby, and Python using pre-configured runtimes. You can also use a custom runtime and write code in any language. App Engine also supports running containers, so you can create a container, use a custom runtime, and write code in any specific language. App Engine has really good connectivity with other Google Cloud services. If you want to talk to a database like Cloud SQL, or if you want to talk to object storage like Cloud Storage, or if you want to talk to a queue, even that option is provided by App Engine. There are no usage charges for App Engine itself. However, you need to pay for the resources provisioned. If you have provisioned compute instances through App Engine, then you'd pay for those. Some of the important features of App Engine include automatic load balancing and automatic scaling. So you can say this is the application I would want to run, and it can auto scale to as many users as you would want. App Engine would automatically increase the number of instances where your application is running and also automatically load balance between them. App Engine can take care of the platform updates and also monitor the health of the application. App Engine also provides versioning of your application. You can have multiple versions of your application running and you can manage traffic between them. So App Engine supports traffic splitting. You can have 2 versions, 3 versions, or 4 versions of the application running, and you can split the traffic between them. You can say, I would want to send 30% of my traffic to the latest version. I want 70% of the traffic to go to V3. So things like traffic splitting can be done very easily using App Engine. Let's quickly compare Compute Engine versus App Engine. So Compute Engine is infrastructure as a service. It provides you with a lot of flexibility. Along with the flexibility comes more responsibility. You are responsible for choosing the image. What OS do you want on the Compute Engine? What software do you want to install? I would want to install Java. I would want to install Python. I would want to install Node. You need to control that. You need to also decide what hardware you'd want to run. You also need to configure access and permissions like certificates, firewalls, everything you need to handle. And you are also responsible for the availability, scalability of your application. However, with App Engine, it's platform as a service. It's serverless. You have lesser responsibility. However, you have lower flexibility. So if you'd want to add a GPU, you cannot do that with an App Engine. So if you have a simple Java application, a Python application, or a containerized application already present, and you'd want to easily deploy that to the cloud, then App Engine might be the right option. However, if you'd want a lot of flexibility, you'd want a specific operating system, you'd want specific hardware with a GPU attached, and if you'd want fine-grained permissions, then Compute Engine might be the right option for you. In this step, we got a 10,000 feet overview of App Engine. To understand it further, let's get our hands dirty in the subsequent steps. Let's dig deeper into App Engine in the next steps. Welcome back. Let's start with understanding some of the important concepts around App Engine. The first concept that you need to understand is the concept of the different environments that App Engine provides. App Engine provides 2 different kinds of environments, standard and flexible. When you are using standard, your application runs in language-specific sandboxes. So there is a sandbox for Java, there is a specific sandbox for Python, and your applications would run in that specific pre-configured sandbox. You can call this an advantage or disadvantage of going for a sandbox. You have complete isolation from OS, disk, and other apps. You don't need to worry about any of them. All that you need to worry about is your specific application code. The language-specific sandbox is automatically provided by App Engine Standard. App Engine Standard comes in 2 versions. V1, which supports Java, Python, PHP, and Go, And these are the older versions of each of these software. So the older versions of Java, Python, PHP, and Go are supported by V1. And there are a few specific restrictions for Python and PHP runtimes. You have restricted network access, and there are specific whitelisted extensions and libraries which are allowed. So only for Python and PHP runtimes, there are a few more restrictions. You cannot have any network access, and there is a specific set of extensions and libraries that are available. You cannot use anything else when you're using Python or PHP runtimes. However, there are no such restrictions for Java or Go runtimes, even with V1. There is also a V2. So this is the newer version of standard, which is recommended by Google. So if you're creating a new application, and if you're planning to use standard, then you should use the V2 version of standard. This would support all the newer versions. So Java, Python, PHP, Node.js, Ruby, Go, all these are supported by V2. This provides you with full network access, and there are no restrictions on language extensions. So standard is when you'd want to run applications in language-specific sandboxes. The other option is to run containers. That's flexible. That is also called App Engine. This is also called App Engine Flexible. So application instances run within Docker containers. One important thing to remember is that when you're using Flexible, you're making use of Compute Engine virtual machines. Flexible supports any runtime. There are no restrictions as such. It has built-in support for certain specific runtimes. So if you have Python, Java, Node.js, Go, Ruby, PHP, and .NET, the built-in support can even build the container for you before deploying it to App Engine Flexible. However, you can use any runtime as long as you can build a Docker image for it. And with Flexible, you also get access to background processes which are running on the virtual machine, and also you can attach local disks with your virtual machines. In this step, we talked about standard versus flexible. These are the two kinds of environments which are provided by App Engine. App Engine Standard runs applications in language-specific sandboxes. There are a lot of restrictions when you are talking about standard. App Engine Standard V2 supports Java, Python, PHP, Node.js, Ruby, and Go. If you want to run a C++ application, you cannot do that in standard. If you want to run a C application, you cannot do that in standard. You have to create a container, and then you have to run it in App Engine Flexible. App Engine Flexible is where you would actually run your applications within Docker containers. You have a lot of flexibility when you're using App Engine Flexible because it supports any runtime. It has built-in support for a certain set of languages. However, if you are able to build a container image, you'll be able to run it using App Engine Flexible. And because your App Engine Flexible applications are deployed to Compute Engine virtual machines, you get access to the background processes and local disks that are attached with your virtual machines. I'm sure you're having a wonderful time, and I'll see you in the next step. Welcome back. In the previous step, we talked about the different environments that are provided by App Engine, standard and flexible. And in this step, let's talk about the application component hierarchy, which is offered by App Engine. Whenever we talk about App Engine, you need to remember about application, service, and versions. So what is application, what is service, what is version? Application is kind of the container for everything. You can create only one application per one project. And the application is the container for everything that you would create as part of your App Engine. For example, if I would want to deploy 3 microservices, then the first thing is I have one application in a specific project. And underneath it, I can create different services for each of the microservices. If you have a full stack application, then you can also create services, one for the backend and one for the front end. So services are kind of what are the microservices or what are the different app components that you would want to run as part of your App Engine. You can have multiple services in a single application. Each service can have its own settings. Earlier, services were also called modules. Underneath the service, you can have multiple versions of each service. A version is nothing but a specific version of your service associated with code and some configuration. So I can have a V1 of the service, V2 of the service, V3 of the service. So I can have multiple versions of the same service. Each version can run in one or more instances. So you can see that for this specific version, we have 2 instances running. And for this version, there are no instances running. And you can have multiple versions existing at the same time. So you can have V1 and V2 of this application running at the same time, and you can even split traffic between them. So you can say I would want 10% of the traffic to go to V1 and 10% of and 90% of the traffic to go to V2. So you have options to roll back and split traffic as part of your app engine. In this step, we focused on the high-level structure of App Engine. When we are talking about App Engine, you can only have one application per project. And this application acts as the container for all the services that you'd want to create as part of your project. And each service can have multiple versions, and you can easily split traffic and roll back to specific versions. Let's talk a little bit more about it when we get to the hands-on part of this particular section. I'll see you in the next step. Welcome back. In this step, let's quickly compare the different App Engine environments. We talked about App Engine Standard and Flexible. What are the different features that are offered by each one of them? Let's look at them right now. Let's start with pricing. How do you price App Engine Standard? App Engine Standard is based on the instance hours. You don't really need to worry about CPU or memory or any of such configuration. However, when it comes to App Engine, you are priced based on the amount of CPU, memory that is used by your virtual machines. You are charged based on the persistent disks or the storage that you attached with your virtual machines. There are three different types of scaling that you can do with App Engine: manual, basic, and automatic. Manual is when you'd want to have full control, so you'd want to manually update the number of instances. Basic is when you have ad hoc workloads. So I have some load coming in, and maybe for a few hours I don't have anything, and then I have a little bit more workload coming in. And automatic is recommended when you have continuous flow of traffic. So based on the number of users, you'd want to automatically scale up and scale down. We'll talk a little bit more about scaling options a little later. However, the important thing to remember is that App Engine Flexible does not support basic. It only supports manual scaling and automatic scaling. App Engine Standard supports all three. The other important thing is scaling to zero. Can you scale down to 0 instances with Standard? Yes, you can scale down to 0 instances with Standard. If there is no load, you can go down to 0 instances. However, with Flexible, there is no such option. You need to have a minimum of 1 instance running all the time. If you want to serve traffic, you need to have at least 1 instance running all the time. The instant startup for Standard is seconds, and instant startup time for Flexible is in minutes. So if you have applications which you'd want to quickly start, then Standard might be the way to go. And because the instant startup is in seconds, Standard supports rapid scaling. You can rapidly scale up and rapidly scale down. However, with Flexible, because it takes a few minutes to scale up, rapid scaling is not really supported. The maximum request timeout for Standard is between 1 to 10 minutes. For Flexible, it can go up to 60 minutes. So if you have application requests which go on beyond 20-30 minutes, then Flexible might be the way to go. You can access local disk from Standard, except for Python and PHP runtimes. You can use this /temp folder. With Flexible, you can attach disks. However, important thing to remember is that the disk storage is ephemeral. It's not permanent storage. Once the instance is restarted, you'd lose everything that is on the local storage. Another important feature that App Engine Flexible allows is SSH for debugging. Because in the background there is a virtual machine, you can SSH into it. The idea behind this step is to quickly compare the different environments provided by App Engine, Standard versus Flexible. I'm sure you're having a wonderful time, and I'll see you in the next step. Back. In the last step, we talked about the different options for scaling instances. We talked about manual, automatic, and basic. We talked about the fact that App Engine Standard supports all the three. However, App Engine Flexible supports only 2 of those. Let's discuss more about scaling instances in this specific step. So automatic is to automatically scale instances based on the load. This is recommended for continuously running workloads. If you have an application for which you will continuously have users, automatic scaling is recommended. So you can auto scale based on a variety of configurations. You can say this is the CPU utilization target. You can configure a threshold. You can also say this is a throughput that I would want. You can configure a throughput threshold. You can configure maximum number of concurrent requests. How many maximum concurrent requests do you want to serve from a specific instance? So you can auto scale based on any of these parameters. And you can also configure what is the maximum number of instances that you would want to run and what is the minimum instances that you would want to run. So that's automatic for continuously running workloads. The next option is basic. Basic is when you want to create instances as and when requests are received. These are recommended for ad hoc workloads. When there is no load, instances are completely shut down. So instances are shut down if there are 0 requests. So if you have ad hoc workloads and it's very important for you to keep your costs low, then basic scaling might be a good option for you to consider. However, the disadvantage of basic scaling is the fact that high latency is possible. Why is there high latency? Because it's possible that there are no requests that are being served by a basic scaling instance right now, and therefore a new instance has to be created and then your request would be served. Another important thing to remember for basic is the fact that it is not supported by App Engine flexible. It is only supported by App Engine standard. When you're configuring basic scaling, you can configure what is the maximum number of instances you can go up to and what is the idle timeout. So if you have no request for a specific amount of time period, then you'd go down to 0 instances. The last option is the manual one. This is the easiest one as far as configuration is concerned. However, there is a lot of manual work involved. You can configure how many instances to run and you can keep adjusting it manually over a period of time. If you have a magic wand and if you can exactly predict what is the load that would be on your application, then you can go for manual scaling. In this step, we looked at the 3 options for scaling instances in App Engine: automatic, basic, and manual. We talked about the fact that basic is not supported by flexible environments. You'd go for automatic for continuously running workloads. You'd go for basic if you have ad hoc workloads and you'd want to keep your costs as low as possible by reducing the number of instances to 0. And if you have the magic wand and you can predict the load, you can go for manual option. I'm sure you're having an interesting time. Welcome back. Are you bored with all the theory that you have been hearing about App Engine until now? Let's get started with playing with App Engine right now. Let's deploy an application to the cloud using App Engine standard. The first thing I would do, as usual, is to go to our Google Cloud platform. And what we would do now is we would create a new project for this specific App Engine. The thing is, I can actually create an App Engine in this specific project as well. That should not be a problem. But I would want to show the creation of the project and all that process as well to you. So let's create a new project and create an App Engine in there. That also allows us to delete the project and delete everything that is present in there. So your App Engine would be automatically deleted as soon as I delete the project. So instead of deleting individual resources which are present in the project, let's try and shut down a project and see that in action too. So let's go ahead and start creating a project. So I'll go into the project screen and I'll say new project. And I'll call this App Engine, or I'll call this Learning App Engine project. Learning App Engine project. You can see that there is a limit on how many projects that we'll have. We can have up to 21 projects, so that's a lot. And you can see that we are under no organization because we are using a free tier account. So all that is fine. So let's go ahead and say create. So the project would be created in a little while. So over here, if I go in and select Learning App Project, you'd see that there is a new project over here. And over here, I can switch back and forth between the projects. So my first project. Now let's get back to focusing on App Engine. So inside this Learning App Engine project, I would want to use App Engine. What would I need to do first? I would need to go to App Engine, right? So when I go to App Engine, there would be one thing that would happen. What would happen? Think about it. Whenever you want to make use of any service within a new project, the first thing that you need to do is to enable the APIs for that specific service. So inside this project, if I actually go into App Engine APIs, so you can see, let me actually close this panel so that we can actually clearly see. So you can see App Engine. If I type it in, I can see App Engine Admin API. And if I go to App Engine Admin API for this specific project, let's see what would come up. You can see that the API is not enabled right now. One thing you can do is to enable this API in here. The other way to enable the API in here is if I go back and let's say I try to create a new App Engine application, the first thing that we are choosing is a region. So whenever we are creating an App Engine application, the first thing that you need to choose is which region you would want to deploy your application in. We already discussed the fact that within one project, you can only have one App Engine application. You can have multiple services under the application, but there can only be one container, one application at the top. And right now you are also seeing the fact that that application in a specific App Engine is also associated with a single region. So if you want to create App Engine applications in multiple regions, you need to create multiple projects. So for now, let's choose the default which is suggested and say create app. So this would create our App Engine application. And I can also choose the language and the environment. You can choose the defaults which are suggested by App Engine. It's suggesting Python and standard. That's fine. Let's go ahead and say next. And now you can see that it says your app is being created and your App Engine app has been successfully created. Now we want to deploy a service to the App Engine. How can we do that? The way you can do that is by going to Cloud Shell. So I'll go to Cloud Shell. And over here, you'd see a very, very interesting option in here. So over here, you can also click Open Editor to open a editor. So if I click Open Editor over here, I'm getting an error saying it's unable to load code editor because third-party cookies are disabled. What I would do is I would open it in a new window. So I'll say open it in a new window. So what you'd see is that a code editor would be opening up so that we can edit our project in there. I'm using Safari and looks like I'm having a few problems in Safari with the code editor. Let's go to Chrome. I've already authenticated to Google Cloud before. That's the reason why it would open up the terminal directly without asking me for password or anything. And I can go in here and say open editor. Once you click editor, the editor would open up in half screen. I don't really like half screens, so I'll say open in new window. And this would take a little while. So let's wait for it to get started. When you open up Cloud Shell Editor, you'd see that you'll be able to edit code in here. And you also have the command prompt available if you want to run any commands. We'll use both of them right now. What I'll do in here is say open folder. And I'll choose my home folder and say open. Now over here in the home folder is where I would copy all the things that we have already in the downloads. If you look at the zip that you'd have downloaded earlier and extract it, you should see a folder called downloads. And in downloads, you should see multiple folders. The specific one which we are interested in right now is App Engine. So if you go into App Engine, app-engine, there are two services which are present, default service and my first service. What I would do now is I would drag and drop them in here. So I'm dragging them from here and putting them into the Explorer part of it. You can see that I'm putting it into the Explorer part of it. And you'd see that those files would be automatically copied in. And if I go into the command prompt, and if I say ls, I should be able to see default service, my first service. And you'd see that these folders have a few files as well. You don't really need to understand these services in depth. A high-level overview should be more than sufficient. In each folder, there are three files. One is app.yaml, which is the configuration for App Engine for that specific application. Main.py is where the Python code for this specific application is present. Requirements.txt is the place where we are defining the dependencies of this specific application. If you are familiar with Maven, then this is very, very similar to Maven prom.xml. If you are familiar with JavaScript, then this requirements.txt is very, very similar to package.json, where you define the dependencies for your node application. So if I open up the requirements.txt, there is a framework defined, which is Flask, which is an framework, which is a Python framework to develop simple web applications or REST API. And if you open up the main.py, it's very, very, very simple code. There is nothing complex in here. All that we have is we have defined a default service which returns a simple response back, my default service v1. Now it's asking me for a preview of new Python language server to get. I'm not really worried about it, so I'll say close. So this is a very, very simple Python application which returns my default service v1. And you have an app.yaml where we have simple configuration present in here as well. We are going to use a runtime of Python 3.9. App.yaml is the application configuration that you are providing to App Engine. Whenever you are trying to deploy this application to App Engine, it would look at this app.yaml file and it sees that you are configuring a runtime of Python 39. And if you are deploying it to App Engine standard, it would make use of the Python 3.9, Python 3.9. Let's first start with the default service. So we have two folders in here, default service and my first service. We'll talk about why we have two services a little later. For now, let's focus on just the default service. So over here, I'll say cd default-service. So over here, carefully see which folder I am in. So I am in the default service folder, and over here I'd want to do a gcloud app deploy. We would want to deploy this app to gcloud. But before we deploy the app, one important thing that you need to always be focused on is which project you are deploying this app to. Right now we have two projects. Which project are we making use of? Let's look at the config setting. Config list. It's asking me credentials. Let's authorize. You can see that we don't really have any project configured. So let's start with configuring the project. So gcloud config set project, and we want the App Engine project. So let's go in App Engine project. It's a nice name, Melodic Furnace and 304906. Interesting. So let's set the project to that. So now we have set the project to that. You can see three things in here, right? Which ID I'm making use of, what is the current folder, and the project as well. The active project is Melodic Furnace 304906. Let's now go ahead and say gcloud app deploy. The important thing is if I actually do a ls in here, you'd see that the app.yaml is present directly in here. So if I actually do a cat app.yaml, you'd see the content of app.yaml right here. So it contains runtime Python 39. That looks good. So let's do a clear, and let's do a, now let's deploy the app. So gcloud app deploy. So let's go and try that. Cool. It's now asking me a few things. Let me make this a little bigger so that you can see more details. Gcloud app deploy, services to deploy. You can see that the descriptor which is being used is app.yaml. So to the gcloud app deploy command, you can also pass in what is the YAML file containing the app configuration. However, the default is app.yaml. And because we have the same name, app.yaml, it uses the default configuration. And this is the descriptor. The source is present from this specific folder. The source of the project is default-service, and it's showing the target project. And you can see that the target service, we talked about the fact that an application can contain multiple services. One of those services is called a default service. So if right now we did not specify a service name at all, that's why it's making use of the default service. And we did not also specify a version for this specific deploy. So a little later we'll see how to specify a version when you're deploying it. But for now we did not specify a version, so a calculated version is made use of. Now when I tried to deploy, I got an error. It says access to bucket denied. It says you must grant storage object viewer permission to a specific service account. Now what we'll do is we'll fix this and then try and understand what's happening. Right? So what can we do to fix this? What you can do is to go over and search for IAM. IAM is where you can configure permissions for different things. You can configure permissions to people and configure permissions to applications, identity and access management. Let's go over to IAM and admin. Over here in the members, you can see all the different members which are present. And if you look at this specific thing, so this is a specific name, and you can see that there is this specific member with that specific name. And what I'll do now is I'll click edit member. I would need to give him a new role. So I'll go ahead and say add another role. And what is the name of the role? The role is also present in here. Storage object viewer permission. So I'll go and say storage object viewer permission. And say save. Now this role has both these permissions. And now I can go back and try and kick off our deploy, gcloud app deploy. Let's see if this would be successful this time. So do you want to continue? Yes. Beginning deployment. It's saying uploading 0 files because the cloud files were already uploaded, but the failure happened with the build. And now it's saying updating service. Now let's try and discuss what was happening and why did we need to give additional roles. Whenever we are deploying something to App Engine standard, what happens in the background is a deployment package is created. And the deployment package is told to an object storage service which is present in Google Cloud, which is called Google Cloud Storage. However, the package is created using a continuous integration and continuous deployment tool which is present in Google Cloud, which is called Cloud Build. Cloud Build needs to access the package which was uploaded to Google Cloud Storage. And the error we got was that Cloud Build was not able to access the package which is present in Google Cloud Storage. And the way we give permission to Cloud Build is by giving access to something called a Cloud Build service account. So there is a service account which is automatically created when we started the deployment. And we went to that service account and we gave it permission to access data which is present in Cloud Storage. So we gave it storage object viewer permissions. And within a little while, I see that the deployment was successful and the URL is printed in here. If I actually pick up the URL from here and go and execute it, you'd see my default service v1. Where is this coming from? We saw that earlier. This is where it's coming from. Main.py, my default service v1. So this is where that text is coming from. In this very, very, very long step, we were able to finally deploy our application to Google App Engine. Let's try and understand it a little more in the next step. I'll see you in the next step. Welcome back. In the previous step, we created our first version of the service and we were able to successfully deploy it to App Engine. Let's now go into the UI and see what's happening there. So let's go into App Engine. So I'm in the same project, Learning App Engine project. I'm going to App Engine. I want to see what are the things which are present in the App Engine. So this is the App Engine dashboard where you can look at some of the metrics around specific versions. You can see that this is the version. Right now there is no data present because we have just launched it up. If you give it a little time, you should see some data come up in here. If you scroll down, you can also see what is the billing status, what is the cost, and you can also see what is the current load on this specific application. You can also see if there are any application errors, server errors, and client errors. We don't really have a favicon configured, so don't really worry about it. Now let's go to services. Services is where you would see the default service. We have created one service which is the default service, and that's what you would see in here. You can see that there is one version for this specific service. So if you go to versions, you'll be able to see the version which is serving the traffic right now. So you can see that 100% of the traffic for that service is being served by this version. And you can see if I go to instances, now if I go to instances and scroll down a little, you can see the current instances which are running. Now you can also get the same information on the command line as well. So for compute, it was gcloud compute. For App Engine, it's gcloud app. So all commands start with app. Earlier to deploy the application, we used gcloud app deploy. But for now, we want to list the services. So I would say gcloud app services list. So I want to list all the services which are present. You can see that there is one service which is present, default, and one versions in it. You can also list versions. So gcloud app versions list. So what are the different versions which are present? So you can see that there is one default version which is present and it's handling all the traffic. And you can also list the different instances that are part of the app. So gcloud app instances list. So this would list all the instances that are present right now. So that's cool. We have one version of this service deployed. Now you don't want to deploy another version of this service. How can I do that? The way we can do that is by actually using v2. So my default service v2 is what we would want to use. And now I would want to deploy v2 of the new service. So v2 of the new service would return v2. How can I deploy v2 of the service? So I can say gcloud app deploy, and then the version label would be automatically assigned by App Engine. Or I can take control as well. I can say I would want to specify the version. So I can say gcloud app deploy hyphen version is equal to v2. So I'm specifying the version, the new version as v2. And let's see what would happen. So it's trying to now deploy the v2 and it says, okay, app.yaml is where your configuration is. This is the target project. That's fine. The target service is default. That's good. And the target version is v2, and there is also a URL which is present in here. So it says, do you want to continue? I'll say yes. So let's go ahead and say yes, and this would deploy the application. So it would upload the changed file alone to Google Cloud Storage, and it would start running the cloud build to deploy the package to app service. So all that happens in the background without we worrying about it at all. But what is important is while deployment is in progress, you'd see that this application v1 is still running. So you can keep sending a few requests to this. So you will see that this is still running. So even when we are deploying a new version, you'd see that the v1 of the application is still running. So let's wait for the deployment to complete. It should take a minute or so, not more than that. Okay, it says updating service done, setting traffic split for service is done, and I'll try and refresh this once. What comes back? You can see that v2 is now live. So as soon as v2 is deployed, it switched traffic to v2. So that's what was done when this was updated. So setting traffic split for service default done. Whenever we are just doing a deploy, traffic is automatically switched over to the new version of the service. And if I actually try and access this now, you can see that v2 is the one which is responding back. And now what I can do is actually go and say gcloud app versions list. What do you expect? You can see that there are two versions. You can see the traffic split. You can see that v2 is serving all the traffic now, and the earlier version is not serving any traffic. However, both the instances are up and running. Now, I would want to find out the URL for this specific version. So I would want to be able to see if this version is still running. How can I find the URL? So you can say gcloud app browse. Oops, it should not be browser. It should be actually gcloud app browse. Let's see if it works. You can see that it's giving me the link to the active version. I'd want the link to a specific version. So I can say gcloud app browse hyphen version is equal to, let's go and specify the version from there. Let's go and pick up the version from here and paste it in. Oops, I don't need the double quotes. Let's remove the double quotes. So version is equal to this, or version space this. So you can see that there is a way you can access the old version as well. So when you deploy the new version, the old version is still running. However, it is not serving any traffic. If I click that link, control and click that, or command and click that, you'd see that this is returning v1 back. If you look at these URLs, the difference is over here, it's version dot the name of the service dot a specific suffix. So that's how the URLs are built. However, the default URL, you'd see that it just has the name of the service dot a specific suffix. In this step, we deployed a couple of versions of our application, and we were able to successfully do that. I'll see you in the next step. Welcome back. In the previous step, we deployed the v2 of the service, and we saw that the traffic was automatically shifted to v2. Sometimes you don't really want that to happen automatically. You'd want to deploy the new version and slowly switch traffic to the new version. How do you do that? Let's look at that in this specific step. So earlier we did gcloud app deploy, and we specified the version v2. Now I would want to slowly control the migration of traffic to the new version. How can I do that? Before that, let's create a new version. So let's call this v3. So I'll save this. So I'm changing the main.py to v3, and what I would do now is I would go in here and say, now I'll go into the command prompt and I'll say this is v3. However, I don't want to shift the traffic immediately to v3. I'd want v1 to be live. I want to test v3 and then switch traffic to v3. And the option which is provided is no promote. So no promote is the option, no promote. This is the option where you can deploy the new version without switching traffic to it. So this traffic would still be going to the old version, which is v2, right? So let's go ahead and do this. gcloud app deploy hyphen version. You can see it shows all the details. Version is v3. That looks good. Let's go ahead and say yes. The default is to promote. However, the option which we used is hyphen hyphen no promote, which means it will not be promoted. So a lot of these yes and no options in Google Cloud would have very, very similar options. So hyphen hyphen promote, and the reverse of that is hyphen hyphen no promote. I really like that because it makes it very, very easy to remember. Now let's see if the service is deploying fine. Yep, it's going in. So the service is getting updated right now. However, you'd see that after updating the service, there is no switching of traffic. So if you go over to the URL, the default URL, the service URL is still, what is it referring to? V2. However, what you can do is you can go and say, I want to actually test v3. So you can go and say app browse version v3 and create the URL for it. Actually, you can say gcloud app browse version v3 and take that URL and you can test the v3. Hey, I got the right response back. So my v3 is working. Basically, you would have your users test it, and then you can go and say, I want to make it live. But I don't want to make all the traffic go to v3 directly. I want to actually switch some of the traffic and observe what's happening in production. How can I do that? So I can say gcloud app services. What I want to do is to set traffic. And I would want to split the traffic. So split is equal to, and I would want to specify the split. The way I would want to split it is I would want to send v3 only 0.5. Probably if it was a production application, I would probably send 0.05 or 0.1. Over here, I just try and split the traffic between v3 and v2. So half the traffic to v3, half the traffic to v2. And I can say comma, comma, v2 is equal to 0.5. So half the traffic to v2, half the traffic to v3. That's what we would want. Let's press enter. Oops, I had a typo. It should not be split, it should be splits. So gcloud app traffic set traffic splits, splits, and it should be specified with a hyphen hyphen. So hyphen hyphen splits is equal to this. Okay, now it says setting the traffic. So for v3 0.5, v2 0.5, and it says splitting traffic by IP. So the default way to split traffic is by IP address. So depending on where the traffic is coming from, it would be split. So let's go ahead and say yes. So now I would take this URL, and what I would do in here is curl. So I'll do a watch curl this URL. So curl this URL will send a GET request to this URL. Watch curl URL would actually send a GET request to this URL every 2 seconds. So let's see what would happen. v2, 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 v2. So over here I'm getting v2. You might have gotten, you might even get v3. But the important thing is, because I'm sending this request from the same IP address and I've decided to split by IP address, once a request comes from my IP address, it would serve the same version. And that's not good. Let's do a Control-C or Command-C. And let's actually change how we set traffic. Splitting by IP might be useful in a lot of scenarios. But in the scenario that we are in right now, where I'm sending all the requests from a single IP, I want to split by a different option. So I can say split by random. So randomly split between the two versions. Send half the traffic to v3 and v2. So splitting traffic by random, that's cool. Let's go ahead and say yes. And you'd see that the traffic change is immediate. So it's going on, it's setting the traffic split. And if I actually start watch curl again, so I'm executing the watch curl that URL again, you can see now v2, v3. So it would actually randomly split traffic between v2 and v3. There is one other option to split traffic by. You can also use a cookie. So your application can set a cookie with a specific name with the specific version you'd want to serve the request from. Now, I'll do a Control-C or Command-C to break this. In this specific step, We looked at how you can actually control the traffic migration from one version to another. We deployed v3 without migrating any traffic towards it. After that, we sent half the traffic towards v3, and now we are happy that all the traffic to v3 is looking good. So I don't really want to actually split traffic. So I want to send all traffic to just v3. You can go in here and say v3 is equal to 1. So right now what we are doing is we are setting all traffic. Please go to v3 and you can press enter. So now I can say yes. So this would send all traffic to v3. And now if I send watch curl requests, you'd see that for some time, for about 2 or 3 minutes, I saw that the traffic was going towards v3 and v2. So making v3 the only version live took about a couple of minutes, and after that I was seeing all the requests were served from v3 only. So this update took a little while, but at the end we just have v3 live. I'm sure you're having an interesting time, and I'll see you in the next step.